Hello and welcome to Standard 8 of the Personal Financial Literacy Standards here in Oklahoma, where we get to talk about credit cards and online shopping. And we have Dr. Sulin Sasser with us again today to visit about the standard. And before we get started, Dr. Sasser, tell us a little bit more about this standard, maybe a little bit of the history behind it, and just share a little bit more with us about Standard 8.
Well, this is one of those standards that, in doing teacher workshops or working when we were developing some of the standards and whatever, people would say, what are these two doing together in one lesson? And the history behind the whole state standards is a little bit of a story itself. But, Superintendent Garrett, Sandy Garrett, who was state superintendent of schools at the time, had some very strong feelings about some of the issues in personal finance. And a lot of those strong feelings came from parents who were concerned about what their kids were doing. Now, keep in mind, we're looking at 15 years or so ago when we were working on developing the legislation and the standards. And one of the things that we knew was happening was that the main time that kids use credit cards was to buy stuff online. The growth of debit cards, and certainly were no apps, at least not commonly used 15 years ago. I mean, people didn't have phones and the apps and everything like what we have today. So the credit card was really how kids, and basically anyone for that matter, shopped online. It's still how I shop online. I'm not a huge fan of debit cards because I don't want people having access to my checking account. But that's the story behind this lesson, and is why they are linked together under one standard. Is the superintendent was adamant that we have a standard where kids can learn the cost and benefits of using credit cards for online shopping.
Very good. That's very interesting information.
And even though things have changed, it's still important to understand how credit cards work. And it's still important to understand the costs and benefits of online shopping. So, regardless of where things are stuck, in the standards, it doesn't really matter when you get right down to it because the concepts are there. And that's what's really important, is that we're teaching the concepts that kids need to know.
And that is where a lot of fraudulent activity occurs, is online and shopping online. So that does,
Absolutely.
very good.
Absolutely. And one thing that most credit cards have today that was not available back then is you can go in and you can set with on the online, go into your account and ask for a test, well, I can't say it, a text message or an email anytime your credit card is used. And that's a great way to kind of track whether or not somebody is fraudulently using your credit card. There was one Christmas Eve, I was, sitting here at the house and my phone was bing, 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 bing. And I looked up and, there was about 5 charges on my credit card. Well, I could run immediately, call the credit card company and say, whoa, 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 wait a minute. And my credit card was having a great fun in Germany, but I was in Oklahoma, so but again, those are ways that we can come back and we can enhance some of these lessons and still keep them relative for students. And oftentimes you hear credit cards bashed, that thou shalt not use credit cards, but I think it's more important to teach students how to use the various tools that are available to them rather than saying don't do. Because as soon as you say don't do, they're going to want to go try it. That's just human nature. And so I think looking at a credit card as a tool, and a very valuable tool for online shopping or other aspects, is certainly something that is of value. And my gosh, after coming through the pandemic, how many of us did not shop online? Is there anybody that didn't shop online in the last several months? So it is important to look at, and it is one of those, even though it's kind of quirky, it's still one that I think is a pretty good standard.
Yes, yes, very good. Well, that's a great start to get us set up for talking about Standard 8 and the resources that are available to teachers and students for teaching Standard 8. So yes, I'll let you take it away, Dr. Sasser, with
Okay, and so we'll start with
yes.
the teacher's guide, where we come back and look at what our standards are, describe and explain interest, credit cards, and online commerce. There, we put it all in one sentence. So, and then certainly we want to compare the cost and benefits. Again, the true message behind our state standards is being able to compare those cost and benefits, because it's teaching kids how to think. And that's exactly the whole intent, is teaching kids how to think and reason through their choices,
Mhm.
because that stays with them, whether they're using a credit card, a debit card, an app, or anything else. It's being able to compare those cost and benefits. And so one of the things that lesson one is going to focus primarily on those credit cards and how credit cards work. And then the second part of that standard deals primarily with online shopping. And so the second lesson in this standard is going to focus on the online shopping. So, that's kind of how we broke it out, knowing that we use credit cards for things other than online shopping, but certainly that's still one of the main ways that we use credit cards. Um, what we did go back, even though as we've talked about in other lessons, we weren't doing major revisions. We did go back and make some revisions in this lesson to make sure it's updated a little bit more than some of the others, because this is one area that does seem to change. And when we did the second revision of the lessons a few years ago, we just had the passage of the Card Act, the Credit Card Act, that was passed, that totally revolutionized basically the information that we as consumers get from credit card companies. And so we updated some of that. Even though it had been updated once, we went back and kind of updated that again to try to keep this lesson current, and the information that teachers are getting, where they can teach current information to our kids. One of the things that I really like about this lesson is it does allow us to break down that credit card statement and look at the information that is available to us. Because if we will just look at that credit card statement, it tells us so much. And so we do have activities that go with this lesson that relate to that. But let's go back and just kind of walk through the lesson itself. Again, we want to describe how credit cards are used, and then be able to compute the total cost, because it's like paying taxes or anything else. We have all those add-ons, and with credit cards, if we don't pay them off monthly, then we do have to pay interest. Um, and and I've heard people say that credit cards are a form of money. No, they really aren't. Credit cards are a substitute for a debit card. Yes, they are a substitute for money, but they're not a form of money. Credit cards are loans. And anytime you have a loan, you have to pay it back. And so that's one of the things that, again, that we really try to emphasize, that it's not a form of money. It can be used as a substitute for cash, or a substitute for a check. People still do that. A substitute for a debit card, but they're all very different. And while those are directly related to a checking account, a credit card is not. A credit card is a loan. And so we do spend quite a bit of time in this lesson looking at what a credit card really is, and the idea that credit card is revolving credit. And so we try to again emphasize some of that in this lesson. The previous lesson on borrowing money talks a little bit about credit cards and a little bit about interest, but it looks at it more in a general sense. Whereas this lesson really focuses in specifically on those credit cards, and how credit cards work, and again, how the interest is calculated. And it also gets into looking at what are some of our rights and responsibilities in using those. I remember a funny story. One of our teachers a couple of years ago said that she was teaching students about minimum payments, and she gave them $10,000 to finance a wedding, and they had to charge it on their credit card. And then, they would go back and they would look at how long it would take them to pay for that. And she was teaching a whole series of lessons, primarily on marriage, but she was weaving this into it. She's a family and consumer life teacher, and so she was weaving as much personal finance as she could into it. And so then, they got a couple of lessons down the way, and she made the statement that the average marriage in Oklahoma only lasts 7 years. Well, this kid had already calculated that it was going to take 28 years to pay off his credit card for his first wedding. And his comment was, well, gee, I'd be on my third or fourth wedding by the marriage by the time I got that first one paid off. So, kids pick up on stuff that we don't always expect them to pick up on. But, think about that, how long that's going to take making minimum payments. And if you're looking at the lifespan, maybe not of a marriage, but of a computer or a cell phone or whatever, you don't want to be paying for that for 28 years, because I can guarantee you that computer is not going to be worth anything. It's not going to have any value at all after the first couple of years. But I think those are fun things to help students think about what it is when they're charging, when they're using that credit card. How long is it going to take them to pay it off? Because if you don't have the money right now, what are the odds you're going to have it at the end of the month? And if you don't have it at the end of the month, how many months is it going to take before you really can uh, absolve that debt? And that's not adding anything else to it. That's just paying off that basic. And again, on credit card statements now, it shows that. Before, you had to go back in and calculate all of that on your own. And one of the things that we do have in the extension for this lesson is using a calculator, one of the online calculators, where you can go back and change interest rates and look at how long it actually takes to pay something off. But remember, that's not adding anything else to that credit card. That's not adding anything else to that debt that you already owe. All that's adding to it is that additional interest every month. So, those are ways that I think we can, really help students process the personal side of some of these lessons. So again, we look at some of the rights and responsibilities, and we can kind of scroll on down there, Amy. There is an activity in here for comparing credit cards. And to be honest, I haven't looked online recently to know how easy that is to do, but it would be very easy to ask the local bank, and maybe 2 or 3 different local banks, to provide you with their credit card application, or with the brochure that explains their credit cards, where students could just go through and look. So, there are ways that you can get around if you can't find stuff online, but you probably can find some of those online as well. And I think being able to compare, again, that lets students know that not all credit cards are the same. Bankrate.com for teaching anything related, really anything related to personal finance, but certainly the financial side of it. Bankrate.com is a great website with the calculators and just a variety of information. So that, might be something that you check out. A lot of times they will even rank credit cards as to which are the best credit cards for teens, or which are the best credit cards for whatever. And so go back and ask why. What are some things that we can do here? That's a great idea. When we revise this lesson, we need to throw some of that in there of ways to use bankrate.com. The problem with some of that is, that changes what they have posted, but still, check out bankrate.com, because you don't ever really know what you'll find. And so we'll move on in and look at the second half, which gets us into the online shopping. And online shopping, if you have ever taught or ever thought about the whole concept of comparison shopping, that's exactly what is in that lesson. And it's looking at what are the cost and benefits. I know there we are, that broken record, but what are the cost and benefits of shopping online versus shopping locally? And you know, I look at shopping locally kind of like I look at taxes. Sometimes we forget what are the benefits of shopping locally. And again, coming through this pandemic and looking at the impact that it's had on businesses, and not just small businesses, but just businesses in general in our communities. It's been very devastating for a lot of businesses. And so where are kids going to get jobs? They're not, the vast majority of them are not going to go to work for Amazon. They're going to go to work for a local business. Where are they when the pep squad or the debate team needs new uniforms or needs travel money or wants to have whatever? Where do they go? They don't go to the major corporations. They go to the small businesses and the businesses that are right there in their community. And so not supporting those businesses and yet asking for a handout seems a little bit dubious to me. So I think that, we need to remind students that those businesses are there because people shop there. And I'm reminded of another story, if you don't mind me taking a moment to tell it. But it was a bunch of fourth graders, and we had done a thing with the teachers, and they were in a very small town, and we had done a thing with all of the teachers in the elementary school there. And they were learning about their community. And one of the things that they did with every fourth grader is they walked the streets of downtown, and the owner of the business would come out and talk to those kids about what they sold and why they were in business, how they got started. And you know what they realized? Well, that's Bobby's mom and dad that own that store. And we don't have to drive 30 miles to the big city to buy stuff. We can buy things locally right here. And so they started to see kind of a rejuvenation just from these kids going around and learning what was in their local businesses. So while we can't, might be hard to do that, most of us still shop within so many miles of home. We don't drive all over, even Oklahoma City, to do our basic shopping. We tend to shop within a relatively small area and just look at the businesses that are there and have students perhaps do a profile of the businesses that are there and how shopping online is very different from shopping with those local businesses. Again, I just want to bring some balance back to our thinking about commerce in general. So that's one of the things that this lesson does, is just look at the benefits of shopping online versus shopping locally. And so if we want to scroll on down, again, we've got the scenario with the three students. We've got the quote. We've got our assessment. We have our alternative assessments. And then certainly this one only has one definition, but we have that vocabulary there at the end of the chapter or the end of the lesson. And so, again, just another way of kind of getting students to think and reason through. This is the activity that I mentioned earlier of unscrambling a credit card statement. It breaks a credit card statement into 10 different sections and has students go back and identify those 10 sections and what those 10 sections are for. And again, here you see the calculator for bankrate.com. There's hundreds of other calculators that are out there. That just happens to be one of my favorites to use. And here's where they're actually going in and identifying the different sources of information on a credit card statement. Keep in mind, this was not available 10 years ago because credit card companies weren't required to put all of this on there. And so the statements themselves make a great teaching tool. fortunately, we could find some online that we could use and not have to use our own credit card statements. The second activity here then looks at, again, the cost and benefits of shopping online, and just a way to get students involved, where they're using sticky notes to identify cost and benefits, and also gets them up moving around the classroom. Um, and you have the four poster boards, and then they identify, what are their costs and benefits, what's the online benefit, what's an online cost, what's a local benefit and a local cost. And so again, they just kind of move around the classroom, and I would make sure that every student did all four, because that you don't want them just to find one, because the idea is to teach that balance, and you teach that balance by having them do all four, both cost and benefits for online and local shopping. Okay, Amy, if you want to scroll on through. Sometimes too, again, this lesson goes in to look at a debate about the value of shopping locally. I love doing class debates, having students get passionate. Sometimes what's really fun, I mean, they'll get real passionate about something they not even believe in, but because you've told them, that this is their subject, and suddenly they start to realize that things aren't as maybe black and white as what they originally thought it was. They start to see things just a little bit differently. The other thing that is there is look at the costs and benefits of using credit cards versus debit cards. And if you wanted to add apps to that, you certainly could. In fact, I guess we did add apps in this last go round. We throw out a couple of videos when we could find good videos, especially those that are from Better Money Habits, because we know those are reliable videos, and we've had a great partnership through the years with Better Money Habits from Bank of America. And so we do throw out some of those lessons and some of those videos for teachers to use. And then we always end with additional resources from 3 very credible sources of information. It's not saying it's the only sources of information, but these are some that are tried and true, and we know are definitely credible sources. So that pretty much looks at what that standard is about and how it came about. And it's one of those things that I think can be a lot of fun to teach. It was when I went back and taught personal finance, as an adjunct. I know that was one of the things my students really enjoyed, was looking at those credit card statements and really understanding what's the impact of making those minimum payments, and how changing interest rates would change that, as well as how just adding a little bit more to those payments would change the payoff, the amount of time it took to pay them off.
Mhm.
So I hope that kind of helps with this lesson.
Absolutely. Yes. I think, and it's just such an important part of personal finance, credit cards, especially, where that's where people get in a lot of trouble. And so it makes so much sense to spend a lot of time to talk about how people can get in trouble with credit card debt and what that looks like, and paying that wedding off over 27 years or whatever it is. And, just buying that pizza when they're in college, and putting it on a credit card. It may be a $15 pizza, but it turns out to be a $300 pizza if they don't pay it off on time, and to really talk about those scenarios.
Well, there was a study that was done by the fast food industry, and keep in mind, several years ago, many fast food places did not take credit cards. And once they started taking credit cards, their sales went up tremendously. But it wasn't just that their total sales went up. It was that the purchase per person went up. And what they began to discover is, well, hey, I've got a credit card. I'll just put that on mine. And so people were buying, for their friends and everybody else, because they now had this credit card. Well, that's all great when you've got the money to pay for it. But it's not so great when that bill rolls around and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do, because credit cards really can bust a budget as fast or faster than almost anything else.
Mhm, mhm. That's an interesting story about fast food. I didn't know about that. That's a great little tidbit of information.
Oh
Well,
yeah,
very
all that historian stuff.
well, Very good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sasser, for sharing these resources with us for Standard 8. Really appreciate your time with us today.
Well, and I also want to say thanks to the teachers that, are doing such a tremendous job to help kids understand. Keep up the good work because we
Absolutely.
need you.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Sasser.